John Paul Peters, welcome back to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Hi there. Great to be here.
JP, I'm so glad that you're here. The last time you were here was when we chatted for Negretto and the recording that you did for Failed States and Victory Lap. And I'm so delighted that our paths need to cross again for the podcast and for documenting the story of propaganda that we do here on the podcast. So just as a reminder for everybody out there, if they haven't heard you the first time you were here for Negretto, and I really appreciated it because we've kind of kept in touch over the last couple years, and I like our little friendship. It means a lot to me.
Cycling and cats music.
Yes, absolutely. And you also were on a conversation with me on Witch Police Radio last summer in Winnipeg, where we talked a little bit more broadly about your work in the Winnipeg music scene. So that's a really cool one as well. But JP, we're here because Propagandhi has gotten together and recorded a new record at Peace coming out the day this episode comes out. We're obviously recording it in advance, but if you're hearing this on May 2nd, 2025, happy At Peace release day. JP, take me back to the beginning of this process. I know you started working with Propagandhi again in about May of 2024 for a DOA cover on the DOA tribute record. Tell me about getting back in the swing of things with Propagandhi last spring.
Yeah, so that was just a fun, quick day in the studio where the guys were like, "Kate, we're doing a cover song. We're gonna come in uh with none of our stuff. Like, we'll bring some guitars and we'll just whatever's there, we'll just have some fun." So that was kind of the MO for the day. And there was not a lot of curation on like guitar tones or like which drums. We just cobbled some stuff together, and the guys recorded basically live off the floor, which was
Mm.
super cool. Because obviously for the main albums, what that we've done, we've it's been a fairly like carefully scheduled, carefully curated, like logical approach with multi-tracking, and isolating and stuff like that. This one was like set the guitar amps in the booths and let's go. So that was a lot of fun actually. I was kind of surprised.
Very cool. That actually is awesome. It kind of sounds more like an Agassi approach, if you will.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Man,
I think the vocals were tracked like right after. So not necessarily live vocal, but I believe we did a scratch at the time. But I mean, I do a lot of live sessions, and it's really fun to do that with Propaganda.
nice. Because I'd imagine that was the only time you've ever done that with them like that, correct?
Yeah, for sure. Other than any other demoing kind of stuff or like, scratch playthroughs. Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. When did they start talking to you about the new record that they were putting together and getting on the books for that?
I think that was, yeah, around the same time. Yeah, they basically called, yeah, booked with my studio manager, my wife Vanessa, and I was like, okay, we're on, we're doing this. So then there was, um, there was not a lot of pre-production on this record, and I know you're gonna probably ask me about that more, but like not a ton of pre-production from my perspective. More of I started going to their jam space, and we started really looking at equipment and talking about process. Um, Chris was already doing, he'd done most of the scratch tracks and demoing of the songs
Hmm.
before the
When did
record.
when did you start hearing the material?
Literally on day one of the album.
Really? So
Yep.
so you went in totally fresh. Is that a new process compared to the failed states and victory lap processes?
Yeah, both of those records, I had a pretty good idea of where things were at. For Victory Lap, we um, what the band would do there is record their jams and get the song to like, hey, here's a really good presentation that feels really good as far as a live performance. And then I would take those and I would put them into Pro Tools and I would map out tempos because they weren't recording two tempos. So there's some very interesting and substantial like tempo deviations that were happening. Like I think we did up to there was one track that had somewhere close to 30 tempo changes.
Hmm.
Which when you listen to the record, it doesn't. it doesn't seem like that. Like it wasn't with the intent of having all these tempo changes, but kind of my job was to like they wanted to be able to practice to a grid um that would kind of formalize the song, and that would also like inform how the scratch tracking would get put together. But they, yeah, like it was there was so what I do is I use like elastic time in Pro Tools, and I feel like I listen to a section, I try to come up with how do these sections, how do they fit together? How do they feel? What's the intent? And then I would kind of work on this thing, and then I would present it to Chris, and they would practice to it. And we'd make a few tweaks and go from there. So that record I had like a really good idea of the material. On this one, they wanted to do less changes. So I think, yeah, overall, there's a lot less tempo changes in the songs, and Chris pretty much managed that stuff. So for me, it was like, it was like my birthday. I'm like, oh, okay, oh, here's what this song sounds like. So it's interesting. I mean, I love being more involved, but every situation requires something else. And in this case, I was like, kind of presented with this nugget, this treat every time we started a new track.
Nice. Did they tell you anything in advance about how like the vibe of this record was going to be compared to past records? Because people listening to it, when it first comes out, especially me listening to it when it first came out, I was like, this is a totally new arena for this band. Were they telling you anything about how it would be, new territory for them as a band before you were recording it all?
To be honest, not a lot,
I mean, I'm
which is
just so
which is really
fascinated by
interesting.
that. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, do you get the same impression from me? Like when I put it on, I was shocked the first time. I was completely shocked. Were you shocked as well when you started hearing the songs coming through the performances?
Yeah, I think so. Do tell though. I want to hear your perspective there.
Okay, so obviously there's no spoilers here because this is coming out the day the record is out. So every song is now available for listeners. But when I got the watermarked copy of the record and I put it on, I had the lyrics and I had the songs on the website. And I listened to it the first time through without any lyrics, and I just let the music and the presentation wash over me. And the first thing that jumps out to me is the massive reduction in the reliance on speed for the songs. Like the record is so much more varied with speed and tempo in general compared to all their past records. The next thing I noticed is Todd's vocal delivery way smoother, silkier, really nice and palatable throughout the record. I can tell he's worked super hard on that. And then also the drums sound completely different than any other past records. Jord told me a little bit about that, but the sound of the recording feels different. The songs themselves feel extremely different. So that it took me a while. I've listened to it probably 20 times all the way through at this point, and now I absolutely love it. But it was like one of those things where I was like, whoa, this is brand new territory for this band. So it was really surprising for me.
Yeah, I would say it was in many ways it was similar for me. Um, I mean, so I'm listening to it through, and I'm like, how is this? Where is it all going?
Hmm.
Like as a producer, I really want to know that stuff in advance. But I'm working with a band that curates things in different ways at different times, the way they want to do it. So for me, I was kind of like you. I was like, this is really, really different. And like, I'm basically along for the ride. And obviously there's a song on the record called Wild Ride. And that's what I was kind of on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really big surprise for me, as a listener of this band who's followed them basically my entire adult life. I'm so delighted that the sounds that came through and the songs that came through are completely original to me as a listener of the band because it gives me something new to sink my teeth into instead of retreading the same tires that they've done in the past, which is great. But I also imagine that for casual listeners, something brand new when you're expecting one thing, it throws people for a loop. And I just hope that people, do what I did and listen to it 10 or 20 times in a row. Um, and like really sink their teeth into it because I feel like they've earned that at this point in their career. But, people will do what they're going to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's like, do you want to just do the exact same thing? Those records, those wonderful records have been made, and like they need to do what's inspiring to them right now. And for people that, want another supporting cast, like it's not that. So
Yeah.
that's okay. Like to me, that's okay. I'm a lifelong fan of the band as well, like from the early demos back in like
Yeah.
92. And so like I mean we time changes us and there's new elements of like just kind of fatigue with where the world's at. It's like, wow, it's hard to make a difference. Like, can I find my inner peace in this, in this place that we're in? And I mean, I think, we'd have all sorts of discussions outside of like the recording time and just I've been feeling too just so tired with when I think about, and I'm overconsumed on the state of the world and the state of North America and all this stuff. And it's so hard to like get out of that and just try to find peace.
Hmm.
And so the first single, like to me, it literally resonates with my heart. So it's amazing to be part of a presentation that just captures kind of the feelings that myself, my family have in so many ways.
Yeah, and I live in Buffalo, so the border is a couple of miles for me. And so these types of things that you're referring to are hitting me big time as well, and it's leading me to feel frustration and anger and despair and just hopelessness with regards to our society in general. So I get it. Like that's why I'm so down with the tone of this record. And I was thinking back to the earliest days of this podcast when we were talking about songs from like Potemkin City Limits, which I consider to be another really experimental Propagandhi record. The songs like Cut into the Earth, Life at Disconnect, um, Fixed Frequencies, stuff like that. I see this record as a continuation of songs like those. You know what I mean? With the slower tempos and the really exploratory nature of those songs. And I am so happy because in the past I've said, you know what, I really could see Propaganda returning to songs like Cut into the Earth or Fixed Frequencies in the future as a style because it's super impressive and super experimental and very progressive in the musical compositions. But it's also a little slower on like older joints, you know what I mean? So I love that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, let's chat a little bit more about the way this record was made because this was not a normal record. Jordan told me a while back that you all recorded this in sort of an unorthodox way, where you had a chunk of time in August and a chunk of time in October, and there was like 3 days in the middle of the week with long weekends on either side where you were booking other bands in some gaps in the calendar. Tell me a little bit about the story of just the tracking of this because I know there were multiple sessions and I'm just curious about your version of that story.
Yeah, no, that's kind of how it went down. I think, summer for us was already looking like quite busy, and the bookings, we didn't book that far in advance for the actual sessions. But one of the main things that we were discussing was just like we wanted there to be space between the like basically divided into two blocks so that Jord didn't have to like go 8 days straight. And there was also some of the tracks that the band wanted to return to do some more tweaking and some more kind of work on. So it enabled them to kind of like buckle down for six. I think we did six the first time around, and then on the second set, come back and be fresh and nail off a bunch more. So yeah, it was like to me, I do love like on an album, if as much as possible to like be 100% in the game for like a block and then get it done. But at the same time, it was fun to do it this way too, and it gave some relaxed time in between. Um, After the August sessions, which I think we actually started late July, but
Hmm.
we were well on the way with Todd's songs as far as getting all the guitars and vocals kind of done for those. And what it kind of did is it like you were talking about Todd's like smooth vocal tone, and different kind of approaches to that. And it allowed him to have a little bit of time. So we kind of did like a first round on the two tracks, and it gave him some time to like to think and absorb. And we actually came back and like retracked some of the vocals, and were able to he was able to kind of like push it a little bit farther in the direction that he wanted. And so the benefit of like not being okay, here's the door. When that shuts, you're it's done. Um, I think that was really effective for that
Mm,
process. And also
excellent.
like the band is they're Chris is very competent like producer engineer, and so like they could easily, he tracked his guitars and vocals and most of the vocals at home. So it was like he was able to like, punch in a line on a song for Todd later on, as things adapted. So when I listen to the final mixes, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a couple lines that they probably were thinking about and were like, hey, we can tweak this or that. And I think that's an awesome process. And it's a process that people should use when they feel, confident and competent with their tools, right? And I just try to tell everybody like learn how to record, use your tools. You can do this stuff. You don't have to be spend the rest of your life regretting, one vocal line that you don't like the presentation of. And it's super
Hmm.
important.
Hmm. Okay, so what songs were tracked in session one?
Okay, I'm just looking at my list here.
Because this is super interesting to me. I like this like extremely, banal minutia in a way, because that's what we do here. We do banal minutia. So
All
we got the
right. So
July
session
August session.
now I'm going to preface this by saying that I have uh when I got the final record, which was about a month ago, month and a half,
Hmm.
I'm not 100% convinced that all of these are final titles. So I'll just say the titles that I know. And that's
Sure.
always been kind of a laugh working with these guys is that like, you know, there's so many working titles going on and then it comes out later. I mean, this happens all the time in production where the
Yeah.
song changes even during mix and then it's like, "Oh, can you make some revisions to can you like bring the snare up on that fill on such and such a song?" And I'm like, "I have no idea what song you're talking about." Because it's no longer the working title. Anyways, here they
Yeah.
are. Benito,
Hmm.
Lost Cat Guy, Guiding Light, At Peace, Courtesy Flush, and Rage Quit.
Okay, so Rage Quit and Courtesy Flush are not songs on the record. So that's really fascinating to me. I'm curious what those were and what they became, you know? Rage Quit. I love it. Courtesy
Yeah,
Flush.
yeah,
Okay, that's amazing. I may have to hit up Chris for a couple of questions that I can put in the interlude between you and him and your interviews on this episode. So stay tuned for more information on that. I think that's really great.
yeah,
But
love it. It's
okay,
it's gonna be
so
another birthday present for me when I open it up, right?
so that's a great first batch. Benito, what a song. Very very shocking song for me in general. But what I want to know is about Jord's drum situation because when Jord was here last summer after batch 1 was recorded, he mentioned that he was recording with small cymbals, wooden hoop AOT drums, and the lack of cymbals really comes through. Like the cymbal variation in this recording compared to past records is massive. It's a little bit of a culture shock for the listener, if you will. Tell me a little bit about the difference in the drums for this record compared to past records.
Yeah, I think well the AOD kit was actually one of George's kits that he had used in the past for some live stuff, but then it had basically been shelved for a long time. And the idea was basically like as he's been dealing with some elements of tinnitus, which are fairly substantial, he was on a drive to like turn down the volume, right? So how do we do that? Well, let's use like slightly softer sounding drums, um, the AOT wood hoops, etc., lighter sticks, and smaller cymbals that don't hang around and display as long. And when like one of the questions I asked him early on in the process, I was like, why don't you just practice on an E kit? But that's a deal breaker for him. So he does not like that route. He wants to feel the real acoustic drums. And like so in that way, well, he's wearing like ear protection inside of ear protection.
Hmm.
And even that, they have a time limit on how long he can play before it affects, his basically ability to sleep and just feel good. So all this that and that was one of the other reasons, obviously, dividing up these two sessions was like we could do like kind of 3 days of, you know, 5 hours a day on drums, and I can spend the rest of the day like comping, editing. We can go through stuff. We can start working on other things, but like to give George some like well-needed space for his ears.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's the main thing. So yeah, what do you get with the smaller cymbals? Well, they don't ring as long. You don't get that wash in the same way, which like pluses or minuses, right? This was like, well, if we're doing a record, we have to be able to do it in a way that feels comfortable. So it's not always like the ultimate sonic decision, right? Like
Hmm.
like it's not my favorite cymbal choice, but it does just create a slightly different sound. And on that way, it does highlight, the actual things that are going on. It doesn't get muddied up. So yeah, like I mean, sometimes we just have to do things that are the best for the moment, and like I'm going to get behind that, right? Like I'm not going
Yeah.
to be, oh my God, you're using like two A's now, you're just not going to sound powerful on the snare. Like I've recorded lots of drummers, well, I shouldn't say lots, there's a few select people that end up playing, they're almost tapping. And I'm not talking about rock drummers necessarily, but it's amazing how monstrous you can make something sound when consistency is involved. And that's what I was going to mention. Like Jord, his drumming ability is very high and his consistency is very high. So it's not like, okay, now your rim shots are totally compromised. You turn up the preamps a little bit, you saturate a little bit more. Um, you just kind of, and I think I still feel the power in the drum performance. Like it's his animation and all that is coming through, right? I mean, we have to think like a lot of drums now, it's, people are programming half of it or recording the drum set in like three different layers, kick drum, snare, toms, cymbals all separately, and then sampling it all still. Well, these are like Jason added like slight amount of sampling in behind, but it's like pretty much the real, like if I when I load up my cleaned sessions at the end, it's pretty much what it sounds like.
Hmm.
So I think his drumming really came across on the record, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm really proud of that.
Well, the thing that I like the most about the lower symbols is that there's tons of Propagandhi records that have tons of symbols, right? Those sounds exist on other records, and this is brand new to me. And the thing that I really like about the lesser symbol presence is how much more space it gives the vocals, especially Todd. Like, there's no competition between sounds with cymbal wash and vocals on this record. Like the vocals on this record are so crystal clear with regards to comparing it to past records. Like I really am enjoying that aspect of the more space by the reduction of cymbals. Does that resonate with you as well?
Yep, I think for sure. I mean, one of the things we did, we used a different microphone on this record. Like obviously, like I know what we used. I believe we used a 47, Neumann 47, made by Wonder Audio on the last two albums.
Mm-hmm.
And on Victory Lap, I believe, yeah, we had a vintage U47 and we had the Wonder 47, and that one won that shootout. So we were going for like a little bit more of a mid forward kind of approach on Chris's vocals. And the mic we used here was a 67. And also I just love Wonder Audio, so I have a Wonder Audio U67. We tried a couple of different mics, but we settled on that one. What I like about it is it's a little bit less mid forward. In other words, it's a little bit less crisp and metallic sounding and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more detailed up top. And I always think of records like even the most recent Johnny Cash stuff done acoustic where you can just really hear the personality of the person singing
Mm-hmm.
without it just highlighting the aggression or the punch. And I'm like, that's I think that's really important here to capture, like, because Chris has harmonics that we didn't hear on the early records because there was a lot of like more tight throat singing, and
Mm-hmm.
he's more like open now, and obviously like a more a more stressed voice box over time, but it allows those details to come through, and I feel like it has a real emotional impact.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Tell me a little bit about the bass that you did on the record. What are we running here? What do you remember about the bass rig and setup?
Yeah, okay, bass rig. We obviously we had a solid DI, and then we ran Todd's SVT Classic through his 810. We tried a couple different cabs, but it's instantly like, oh yeah, that is what Todd is used to playing, right? So that's basically his live rig. And then I have a third channel which I used, I think, in a little orange Dark Terror, which is just a little micro head, and I use that through a guitar cab to give a little bit of crunch and a little bit of crisp kind of to the details. And then I was also running a fourth channel, which was a Dark Glass Alpha Omega Photon preamp that is kind of it's a really good it's a versatile device that I can use to kind of fill in some holes. So yeah, we basically have a presentation of the DI, the SVT, and the kind of guitar amp, which doesn't have a lot of bass, and then the Alpha Omega. So it gives kind of a palette. I'm all about palettes when it comes to like capturing sounds. Like I well, I shouldn't say I always use multiple mics on guitars, but for heavier music, I'm probably running at least four mics, and I do like to keep those tracks with the intention of the mixer, whether that's myself or someone else, having the ability to do some like without EQing, just choose the different palette from those different mics and blend them together. So it's
Gotcha.
kind of like painting. It's like, here you go, Jason. Here's these four tracks, and here's how I've kind of like pre-blended them. Take it from there. You can mute one of them, not use one of them. And with the DI, the what I always do is get something that's like there's no compression on that DI track. It's super clean. If anything needs to get changed or altered or reamped or whatever, that can easily be done at any
Okay,
point in
so
the process. And I will say we blew Todd's SVT during the first bass sessions. Um, it just yeah, the biasing went off and the tubes were yeah, the whole bias section of the amp died, and we ended up trying to quickly get it out for repairs. Um, so we had to jump to a different amp. We ended up, plugging in a V4. So it's a little stressful. So I was using an Ampeg V4, which is like a 6L6 version of that amp as opposed to the bigger SVT. And it didn't have quite the same weight, but it was good in its own way. At any rate, we, signed off on it, recorded I think two tracks with it, but then on the in the final reamping sessions, we went back and reamped like once his SVT had been repaired.
mm, okay.
Yeah.
So so that's session one. I want to know about session two a little bit as well. And I got a couple other questions about Todd, but we'll get to those in a second. So tell me about session two in October.
Yeah, session two. I mean, that one was basically kind of we did a few punch-ins and things like that on the first tracks. Now, I will say like the guitar process was interesting on here because I would say that half of my time working on the tracks was working on Chris's guitar. So Chris would track at home and
Hmm.
he would give me everything he tracked and I would choose the things. And one of the things that he found really challenging was like not having David Gillis in the band, the Beeve, for that second track is he was like now faced with making decisions on what the other guitar would be, and that was new territory in a way. Like so he really had to, he would often have like three or four or five different ideas for certain parts. Like not so much in lead bits, but just in harmonic rhythm, tracks, the stuff that makes the song come to life as opposed to just duplicating your rhythms. But
Right.
it was a whole new realm of like, oh my God, I have to like make these decisions. So I would get he'd record like so let's say for Todd's tracks he'd record the second guitar at home. Todd would record here, and then I would comp Chris's parts, and I'd have to listen through absolutely everything, which as an engineer, that's not like it's actually not time effective because when I'm tracking a guitar, I'm like highlighting, oh, I love that. and then, oh, here. And I've already like pre-compiled all my options, but here I'm getting the blank slate of like all the takes. And, sometimes I would miss stuff, but also like my brain is going to sleep after 10 takes.
Yeah.
But, and so that those were challenges for me that I had to overcome, was just to like really focus. So I had my assistant Katie Pescatelli help out with some of the comping to get some initial vibes, and then I would take it from there, because I was still trying to get, a bunch of Todd's vocals tracked and getting bass done and stuff. So there was a lot of stuff. We pretty much kept it to the two of us. But yeah, like a lot of decisions in parts, and going, I'd present it to Chris and he would be like, "Are you sure about this?" And I'm like, "Partially sure. I mean, I like this for these reasons." And so that's, I would say, as far as guitar goes, yes, I wasn't hitting record on them for the most part, but my creative process was that bounce back of like, what's the best course of action for that second guitar? You know, to bring something interesting to it, but not make it too like, yeah, too out there. Like, it has to support the song. And I really think the band was focused on that. But yeah, lots of challenges with the creativity on that second guitar.
Scary. That really is nerve-wracking. I know that well, Chris mentioned whenever I chatted with him, which listeners will hear in just a little bit, he found the whole process pretty stressful as well. So I know that it was kind of an anxious feeling for him as well. So thank you for telling me about that version of events, because it sounded just a lot, a lot. Okay,
Yeah.
so did Todd do guitar also? I think Todd played some guitar, right?
Yeah, you bet. Todd played guitar on all of his tracks, which I think were 5 tracks.
Cool. Very
Yeah.
cool.
So and then Chris would play a second guitar. So
Okay.
Chris would there were challenges there too, because Todd's writing style and Chris's is actually very, very different in the way they formulate riffs and things like that. So a downside to the guitars getting tracked at home, and Chris can tell you why he tracked the guitars at home. It's interesting to me, as kind of like that's how we're doing it. So I'm an observer, but also I'm like, okay, here's our deal. We're gonna take it from there, right?
Hmm.
So sometimes those riffs wouldn't be matchy matchy. And there'd be like these little things that are different. And then those things add to the stress, because then retracks are in order. And, I'm used to like turning up guitar one and going, oh, yeah, okay, we need to just tweak these notes here. And then we move on, we get that part and go. So this kind of added a layer between everything. So then I'd have this big spreadsheet of like, here's things we need to, take a look at, because I'm not comfortable with this, and then man, in the process, just with that amount of material like to listen through, and limited time to do it, I would miss things too, and I'm like, okay, I didn't, I'm very good at looking at waveforms and going like, okay, these are exactly the same, but there'd be like a different note on one of the takes that I maybe didn't catch. And then it created a whole, like, Chris was like, "Well, but you didn't listen to everything." And I'm like, "Oh my God." Like, I thought I did. 'Cause- But being one of the, 200 million ADHD members of society, it's an ask.
Yeah. Oh
And
boy.
I'm not
Okay.
perfect.
Well, okay, let's talk about October. So the band does some stuff in July and August. They finish up these batch of songs and then they come back. Is that how it went?
Yeah, so we had like initial, I would say, the in the first session we had Todd's both Todd's tracks, bass for all them, drums all comped, Chris's initial comp on tracks, and then he was working on vocals in that time in between.
Okay.
Okay, that was the first session. And then in the second session was basically comping like crazy vocals. So I comped all the vocals, um, and presented them and went through them, etc. And then the first guitars, there were some recomps, tracking of second guitars, recomping all those guitars, tracking bass and drums for the second batch of songs, tracking all of Todd's vocals, and then, you know, retracking guitar one bits and things like that. And then doing a whole bunch of harmonies, which we probably did about 75% in studio. We were like really pushing the end of the session at that point. So they were able to do some more of that stuff at their place. at Chris's studio, and then obviously lots of reamping, and then leads and specialty stuff that we did. And the reamp was the way the whole thing was done is we had to curate kind of a guitar DI setup that was like, okay, for sure this is the way to do it. And for people that don't know, when you're DIing guitar to reamp, there's layers of separation between the performance, the initial performance, and then how that electronically is creating like the sound when it comes around. So when you're DIing, you can't just go like, I'm going to get exactly the same sound I'm hearing right now because the impedances change even with different DIs and different processes. And as we discovered with different cable lengths and all sorts of things. So I'll just kind of jumping back to session one of the goals was curate a guitar DI setup that Chris is 100% confident on that he can just move ahead and track guitars. All right.
Hmm.
So we put that together in the studio. We try a bunch of options. I think we settled on a Neve Portico 2 channel strip for the DI. We were also auditioning like an FM9 box. There was, we were trying Avalon preamps for the DI, and each one of them changes the tonal cast that comes back to the amp just slightly, but the Portico felt like the most familiar to Chris. And so we put together this, okay, you're good to go, right? So he took it to his home studio, and while I'm like tracking Todd, I get a text and it's like something's wrong with the DI. It doesn't sound right. Like, can you come down and check it out? So I'm like, jump in the car, drive over to Chris's place, and we're looking at this, and it does not sound the same. And it sounds like there's a blanket over the tone, and
Hmm.
we're like, what the hell? So we package it up, we bring it back to Private Ear, and we're testing it here, and there's no blanket. It's fine. And we can A/B the tracks. And obviously, like if it's like tracking with your tone halfway down on the guitar. You're not going to get the performance, the harmonics are not coming through. Like, what could be going on, right? And what we established after like 2 hours of stress was that the cable that he was using at home was causing and it wasn't a malfunctioning cable, it was a good quality cable, but the
Wow.
guitar patch was causing the tone loss. And
Wow.
of any band that I've ever had to like kind of find these little minutiae that absolutely would not have been a minutia at all. Like it would have been a deal breaker. We would have had to retrack all the guitars. Like it would have been crazy. So that's a big deal, right? Now you've spent like 150 hours tracking guitars or whatever time he needed, and now you have to redo it. Like it's unimaginable. And that's a lot of
Wow.
energy, right?
Oh
So
my God.
so, back on Victory Lap, we were discovering different speaker cables, like amp to speaker, were causing like substantial differences in tone. Not necessarily, deal breakers, but like, no, that particular cable, it sounds like a little bit like this, and the other one sounds like, we had to make all these decisions, right? So with this DI process, man, he ended up just taking the cable that we were using at the studio here, which wasn't like some $600 cable. It was like probably an $80 high quality gold connectored Amphenol cable. But the biggest thing is the cable length. So he had a 15 that he was tracking at home, and and we were using a 10-foot at the studio, and that literally made the difference. And I mean, I often run a 20-foot cable into a pedal board that has like 15 pedals on it and then into amps. And I'm just like, whatever, sounds great. But now, now you're like 10-foot cable to the DI and it's totally not going to work. Or sorry, the 15.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
Crazy.
And I believe that has to do with there's different things going on in the bounce back of impedance between a guitar and a DI versus a guitar um and the amp if you're dealing with the amp directly. So it's like all these things, you got to get them right. Otherwise, you're just going to waste a ton of time. So we were able to figure that out and move on. But that was one of those like moments where it's like, okay, everything is now like heightened in its kind of stress level.
What's terrifying because Chris had an arm injury as well that he was dealing with
Yep.
and leading up to surgery. So there's a significant time crunch on things having to be done. Otherwise, the lead guitar player who wrote all the songs being tracked can't play guitar for months, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Scary. Um, okay, let's talk about session two. Tell me about October.
Yeah. So again, the dialing in the next batch of songs. So what I had to do was basically we wanted to keep the drums exactly the same. And I'm like I do records like all different ways. Sometimes there's different drums on every song or whatever. Like it's but for a record like this, like you really we had a pretty intensive setup on Jord's kit. So what I did at the end of August is documented it super carefully. All the hardware, I run signals through each piece of gear, make sure we're getting the same levels back, take photos of everything, and then basically like I left striking tape on the floor for like a month and a half in between the
Sweet.
sessions. Like so every room mic had its place, we could get back and that wasn't, it all can be done. It just takes like the decision, okay, we're going to recall this exactly. So we left George's drums at the studio. We left the same heads on them. We boxed them up and then we basically unpacked them, set them up, and tracked the second batch of songs. And I don't even think we changed the tom heads. I think they were just sounding awesome. So there was not much to do. And it was also kind of in this process. I have often in the past had a drum tech. um, I like having drum techs because then I can just say, make it a little bit more like this, and then I can work on other stuff. But my go-to drum tech was not available for this session, and I'm like, well, we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna own that ourselves. And George's like, you good? I'm like, yep. So
Nice. What's these songs that you did in October?
okay, let's look at session two here.
And I'll see if I can. I have the track list in front of me too, so I'll see if I have to
Yeah.
do any point out any notes.
So Fire Season, God of Avarice, Vampires, Prototype, and I don't know if it's called Palette Cleanser.
No,
I don't
Prototype and
think it
Palette
is.
Cleanser are not on the record.
Okay,
Um,
Prototype is the really different one with kind of the loops.
Stargazing.
Yeah,
Is it?
Stargazing, that's it.
It sounds like 80s, almost like 80s rock. Like,
Yeah, you bet. That's the one.
okay. Man, what a song. That song shocked me beyond belief. That's like to me, every record, like the last record, the standout outlier was Lower Order, with the clean guitars,
Yeah.
about the animal industrial industry. Um, this one is the massive sonic outlier on this record. Did that one surprise you when it started getting put down on tape?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. For this one, Chris had a bunch of pre-programming as far as like some of the percussion um and other sonic elements. So that one was more of a replacement kind of procedure where we recorded real drums for it. And then we did do, I don't think we've ever looped drums on a song before, but this one had a certain amount of looping of certain parts
Hmm.
just to give it that little bit more mesmerizing kind of 80s feel.
Yeah, man. And another one that's really so Chris has two songs on this record that shocked me beyond belief. Um, Stargazing and the closer, Someone Needs to Die, but maybe not you. I think that's what it's called off the top of my head. Really slow, really like it's a very intense build, but it's a very slow song. So that one, the closer and Stargazing were both complete shocks to me when I listened to it the first several times through.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely. And but I love that also you have those moments on the record where it's like, oh yeah, like Cat Guy, or like you're just there's this familiarity, and then there's creativity that plays around. And yeah, I hope people love it. It's so funny. I still am listening to it as an early listener. Like I feel
Yeah.
like every time I hear it, I feel like, oh my God, I finished this record, 2 months ago, and I feel like I haven't actually absorbed it yet, even though I've heard everything on it 6 million times.
Yeah, man, and there's a couple of Chris vocal lines on the record that I cannot stop thinking about. Um, Whenever he's singing the last song and he does the creation don't make no trash line,
Yeah.
oh my God. And then the other crazy one is in Vampires Are Real. Um, when he snarls, it's like a venom snarl. It's like other times we disappear. And I was like, whoa. Those two particular Chris moments are unbelievable to me. Completely amazing, shocking, surprising, attention grabbing, brand new for me. I was blown away at those two particular Chris vocal moments on the record.
Oh, and comedic. Like I'm hit by the impact of those lyrics, but then I also want to burst out laughing.
Yeah,
I come from a very like from a conservative Christian like upbringing as a child. And these things are like I would say I was quite sauced for the first half of my life. I was in the sauce. And I say that in just like creation don't make no trash, but look at it. Like it's
yeah.
just
Oh, man, I'm glad that you're still processing everything as a fan and as a listener yourself, even though you freaking made the record. You're like, you know what I mean? Like,
I
it
helped make the record.
it's awesome. I mean, it's awesome. Yes. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, so okay, so everything's done, right? October, everything's done. You all start sending stuff down to Jason at the blasting room. Tell me about that process of getting everything in order, finalized so that it can be shipped off to the next stage.
Well, I would say that was actually still October. So we were kind of on this push to like get all those guitars, comped, and then the big door closer is the reamp time, right? So I think it was about a day and a half of reamping where we were curating the tones. So this is where like, these slightly different kind of, I don't know, I would call them like almost less aggressive, kind of old school, like I don't know, I love like different guitar tones than they've done before, but that's where those got kind of finalized and curated. I really enjoy that process. That's, we basically have all the cabinet options set up in the main studio, and we have our speaker cables through the wall, and we're choosing our heads in here, and also pedals and things like that. So we basically lock in our main rhythms, and that's, you know, there's certain things that blend. You don't just necessarily duplicate the same thing. So the right and left channel, those are different guitar rigs. And again, we're thinking of like in the past, we'd have David Gillis on the one side, Chris on the other. And David was an 800, like a Marshall 800 player with pretty much just an 800 with a boost, I believe. And then Chris, at least on Victory Lap, he used a Friedman. So we still kind of used that same head, but with some different speaker options. And it's amazing how like changing up some of those things. I think we were using Celestion greenbacks on this, as opposed to like the more V30 sound that I believe we were using on Victory Lap.
Hmm.
Those little things really change kind of the like sonic palette of those guitar tones. And then guitar two, we actually used a little plug for Fuzzrocious pedals. We used a pedal called the Lil Fella for the rhythm guitar tone, which is basically like Fuzzrocious's idea of an OCD pedal. A little bit of well, a little bit of a fuzz pedal, but it can be focused with a Maxon 808 or something, going in, or a tube screamer going into it, or like I love the Rev tilt boost, which has like a cut of the low end to really bring those amps alive. So yeah, we're basically, once we established those, then I think we did a third track on a few things, but for the most part, it was a simple like left right guitar setup. And what I love about that is just how much personality that comes through. It's not just a wall of sound. It's like, yeah, you can make it sound heavier. You can just like scoop out the mids, the low mids, and just kind of like push it into your ears and be like, hey, we're doing aggression here. But here you get like all the nuances, all the little things, and also like lower gain tones, possibly than they've ever recorded with before.
Yeah. Yeah, the lower gain tone. Chris has been talking about that a little bit on his Patreon. So if anybody out there listening is curious about Chris's commentary, a little bit more on low gain, um, there's been a little bit of commentary on some Q&A he's been doing on Patreon too, which is cool. Oh, earlier, right when we started, you mentioned a song called "The Wild Ride," correct?
Yeah.
I
So
think
that's
that I think that's called actually. I think it's called "Prismatic Spray," and then in parentheses the Tinder date,
yeah, that would make sense.
where it's almost like Metallica, Black Sabbath, kind of like kind of like guitar riffs like that.
Yeah,
Um,
Todd song, right?
no, it's a Chris song.
Okay, Wild Ride was a Todd song.
Ooh, interesting. Is that
We'll
there's
have
no
to we'll have
longer
to brief
young.
on some of these working titles. Here, I'll
Oh, it's
play it for you.
so funny. Yeah. Um, yeah, the I'm definitely curious now. Is it playing? I don't hear anything.
Is
Yeah, I
that
don't think
coming
it's come.
through?
No, it's not
Oh
coming
yeah.
through.
Oh, here I got to turn my original sound for musicians on, which apparently wasn't on.
Oh, weird. Oh, I hear myself
So I
now.
s- so I was sounding okay even with that setting off. I set it up before the Zoom session. I love that it just turns itself off. Thank you very much, Zoom.
Oh, it
Here
sounds
we go.
great, by the way.
Oh, do you hear it now?
Yeah.
People cross here in the night.
Yep. Okay, cool. People cross here in the night. I think that is day by day.
It should be second last.
Yeah, day by day.
Yeah, there you
Okay, so
go.
turn back that setting so that I don't hear myself coming through your speakers.
Boom, fixed.
Okay, sweet. Um, so JP, are there any uh really cool like little moments or memories or happy accidents or anything like that that happened during the record that are kind of standout moments for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say like I mean one of the big things for me was just really feeling like Todd's confidence in the studio. Um, in the past, he'd had some negative experiences in the studio where he felt like maybe there was a real time limitation. It's like, hey, just get in there and get this done or whatever, and it caused some traumas of just so he felt like if he went into the studio like he was going to screw stuff up,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And this is our third record that we've done together, and I feel like he can confidently just do his thing. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, that's like, that feels so great. And I think that comfort level with each of the band members, you know, doing their thing and knowing that I'm on their team and that we're focused. To me, that's like obviously less of a happy accident, but like I would say other than happy accidents would be some of the tones that we were getting on the guitars. Um, Fortunately, the DI thing wasn't a happy accident.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there were some new fills that were done. Like Jord really curates his fills super carefully, and that's something that like I've always appreciated. And for any like prop fans that know the band, like it's not just a 16th note snare fill before the start of the chorus or whatever. Like he won't do that. If that was coming up, it might be like an hour or two where Jord's going to be like, I got to get something else, something better. And, then we're off for like 2 hours spitballing ideas of, where, well, we've done that one would work here, but like, how about something like this? So those are really enjoyable for me because those are each like a micro problem. And I'd say, I mean, he's got 98% of it down like pre-studio, but there's a couple of those, it could be whatever moments that end up like being a lot of fun to try to like pick from the seven options or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well,
Another major, okay, we had a great chat one day where I, so, okay, going back to like 1996,
mm-hmm.
there was a basement show on McMillan Avenue here in Winnipeg,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a discussion that kind of broke out where there was like two sides to this, like there was there were definitely some like religious people at the show, but like the prop guys were there, my band was there. My band wasn't actually like I was in a metal band called Officer Down, and
Hmm.
we were more of like a social justice focus. But at the time, like we were pretty much all like ascribing to Christianity. And
Hmm.
there's this discussion of like I don't know, the meaning of life or the existence of God or whatever, like spilled out onto the front lawn.
Hmm.
And I was like, Chris and I were like looking straight at each other. And he was like, if I had an elf or like a green elf on my shoulder and told you it existed, like you can't tell me it doesn't exist. In saying like, how can you tell me that God exists, right? And at the time, like I aspired to prop. You know, I was in a punk band. I'm like, I wanted to, here's like my local hero,
Yeah.
and we're having this like ridiculous discussion on the lawn, but at the same time, like a pivotal discussion. Do you know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think I'm right, and he thinks he's right, and so we actually we chatted about it for the first time since then, and we had this great discussion. And I said like I wanted to thank you guys for sticking to your guns on things and for like arguably being one little part of my like unconversion
Hmm.
and unalignment, I would say, to those religious structures that like I I was very skeptical of, like even as a young punker, but still kind of like had the locked in belief system from my upbringing. And I just wanted to, I just really appreciated that they've always presented something that made me think right from the start, but also like that I had now kind of come to some different, over decades, come to different conclusions, and just that they were a little part of that. And they thought that was like really funny and
Hey,
like surprising.
Chris was probably like, what are you talking about? Did he remember that?
Um, Vaguely, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where you're like, did that really happen? Like, were we like arguing about the existence of God? Like, how ridiculous. But at the same
Yeah.
time, like, it isn't ridiculous because when those kind of perspectives are formalized structurally and they become religions, and then religions do certain things and can be incredibly damaging, like they are important. It's not just about, the belief. It's about how the system is co-opted and, well, and designed
Yeah.
for different
Well, and
purposes.
what's so crazy too is if I think about my college years, when I was having a lot of conversations like that, like 2002, 2003, I was at a bunch of parties hanging out with like tons and tons of people that if somebody came to me today in 2025 and was like, hey, remember that party we went to at the University of Missouri in 2003 where we talked about XYZ? And I'd be like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? So some conversations that are so pivotal to some people just get lost in the shuffle for other people, but those moments are so important for somebody else's life that to be reminded of that is always really amazing to me whenever something like that happens for me. Like I've had people come up to like friends of mine who remind me of something that like we did in like Europe in like 2004, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And then it just opens up this amazing well of memories. You know what I mean? To kind of reclaim those moments from time.
Yep, and memories, but also like remembering that dialogue is like so very important. Like
Yeah.
even with people that have incredibly different opinions, and it seems to be getting like harder and harder for these. It's like, well, if you don't agree with what someone posted, then you're either the troll or you're just going to pull away from that and stick with your little community. And that's the beautiful thing about the how the punk scene has always, at least ideally, has presented a certain amount of like the ability to have opinions, but also obviously it's always going to be curated a little bit.
Hmm.
But like, yeah, we just need to keep, I was in a dialogue yesterday where I'm like, man, there's this troll is like calling everybody who thinks one thing like a stupid moron. And I just
Yeah.
said like, there's actually educated people on both sides of this. So instead of calling them stupid morons, let's like bring the stuff to the table and discuss it. And there was no interest in that, and it was it ended up just being a bot actually, which I fairly sure it was. And
Man,
it's unfortunate. And I'm like, but this wasn't a bot situation on Macmillan. This was like real opinions and the desire to like to find answers to
yeah.
stuff.
Well, and the fact that you've gone on to have this decade plus long relationship with the band at this point across three records and seeing their progression and then thinking back to those earliest interactions with them in the 90s, how special is that, you know? It's like that's meaning of life stuff in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. There's some great memories from back then. I don't know if you ever want to ask Chris about the Coke can, but I don't know if he'll bring that up.
Is it involving nudity at shows?
It is. Yeah,
Oh yeah, I've heard those stories. That's good
great.
stuff. There's images online. I'm sorry, Chris, but there is. Um, so, um, JP, very cool. Very cool. Thank you for telling me so much detail about the creation of At Peace. The record now being out for listeners, even though we're recording in advance. Um, Very special to have the story of the production and the creation of the record with all the little nuanced gear details. It's kind of like an oral history of the record. That's kind of what I'm hoping to bring to listeners with regards to that. Is there any other detail that's in your mind that you haven't said that you feel like you absolutely must put on the record before we bring this in for a landing?
I think we're pretty good.
Amazing. Well, John Paul Peters, Private Ear Recording, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thank you so much for hanging out with me again to chat about working with my favorite band in the world. Means a whole lot that you're here, and my best to Vanessa as well. So thank you so much for rejoining me for the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks, sir. Thanks for having me on, and it's always great to chat with you.